Welcome to UNCAGED. Today we're speaking with Heather Beatty. Heather is the founder and CEO of ScopeFour Capital. She's a next generation thinker and leader in climate and impact investing. She has over 15 plus years of experience and has had many top leadership positions, including the head of global consultant relations at global financial institutions like First Eagle Investments, Thompson Investment Group, and TCW. So we'll talk a little bit about her background in a second, and we'll definitely talk a lot more about what she's working on now at ScopeFour Capital. But let's go back to that first question. Heather, tell us a little bit about you and your career.
Yeah, thanks. So as you said, I have been in pretty traditional investments for almost now 20 years. And I would say I'm a lifelong learner, reader, traveler. And as I began to read different books about climate, I became more and more interested in it. And kind of around the time that I began to read more about it. I don't know if you've ever read the book Sapiens. Have you ever read that?
Yes, yeah.
So it's not about climate, but it is about humanity and kind of the direction that we're going in. And if you read Yuval Harari's books, he also wrote Homo Deus and then another after that. It talks a lot about, where are we going as people, as humanity? And a lot of clients began to ask us about how we're thinking about climate from a risk perspective in our portfolios. And a lot of times the portfolio managers didn't quite know how to answer that because they weren't really trained to be thinking about climate risk, because it's kind of a new conversation, especially in the world of investments. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm also a big traveler, and I went and visited Cambodia. I took a bike trip through Cambodia thinking it would be all about nature, be an amazing trip. And I kind of began to see everything that I was reading about, everything that people were asking about from a risk perspective in real time. As I was biking through, a lot of air pollution, a lot of infrastructure issues, a lot of throwing trash and plastic into waterways that lead to oceans. And so it made me feel so inspired that I ended up leaving my job to launch an investment firm that focuses only on climate solutions.
Excellent. And that is ScopeFour Capital. So tell us a little bit more about the path of creating ScopeFour and really what you and the team are working on now.
Yes. So I also began to invest personally in climate strategies, both on the private side and on the public side, and have worked in both public and private markets throughout my career. I think there are a lot of private companies, particularly VC, that's focused on climate tech. And that's sort of oftentimes nascent technological areas that we can help promote or, help eradicate climate change and help promote sustainability. But then on the public market side, to me, that's a major area where we can scale these climate solutions. And even though, you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of press about what's going on with BlackRock, so on and so forth, there are really two distinct topics that I think is going on in the news that oftentimes people don't separate, and I think they should. One of those things is, ESG is definitely kind of a hot topic in the news right now. To me, climate's something else. It's not really ESG. ESG is a framework, lowering emissions so that we can help eradicate climate change is really separate, and it's more solutions oriented. And so we created an entire platform of companies, a universe of companies that are specifically focused on reducing emissions. And then we've built portfolios where we think that these companies are going to benefit the most from the trend towards decarbonization. So they're going to scale these climate solutions and also benefit the most from a profitability standpoint.
That's amazing. So, tell me a little bit, maybe give one of these groups a shout out here. What are they working on?
In terms of firms?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I have a couple examples. One of them is Hitachi, which is a Japanese industrial company that oftentimes people don't think of But they actually have a new CEO that's focused wholeheartedly on decarbonization, and they've put about $8 billion of R&D into a variety of different solutions. One of which is, for example, electric trains. So if you just think about the tailwinds towards continuing to electrify the train system in Japan, it's a huge initiative for the government, and also in China. And so Hitachi is on the forefront of that. In addition to that, they recycle wind blades for wind power. There's obviously a ton of wind power that's continuing to scale, but the blades don't last forever. And then they've been burying them in the desert. And so there's another way to go about doing that. And they're focused on that, just as another example. And then the last is just, again, example is drone afforestation, meaning drones are replanting trees rather than people. So those are 3 examples that Hitachi is focused on.
I love it. I love that drone example. Very, very interesting stuff. Now, I mean, Heather, certainly the topics around sustainability, climate change, ESG are very hot topics. And yet,
No pun intended.
yeah, but But, sometimes it's hard for me to get a handle on really where we are, because I'll be part of conversations where it seems like we're at square one, and then I'll speak to some folks that are doing incredible work, and it seems like we're on square 11. So, I mean, give me a sense of where we are in the process right now.
To me, this is one of the greatest opportunities of our lifetime as humanity. It's one of the greatest opportunities of our generation, and I think it's the most critical one for humanity. And because population has grown so much just over the last 100 years, and because the demand for energy and the demand for food and water has increased with the population, it's obviously created a huge burden on the planet, which has created a lot of what we're talking about when we refer to climate is just the extraction of so many things that create emissions in our atmosphere. And so where are we is we're just on the precipice of beginning to lower emissions. A ton of articles have come out. Obviously the United States is very committed to it through the Inflation Reduction Act, as an example. What a lot of people don't realize that is, even though the United States is one of the, I think it's the number 2 emitter globally next to China. And it's still, I believe, the number 1 emitter from a per capita standpoint. At the same time, the United States has already peaked in its emissions. And that happened like 5 years ago, and it's dramatically coming down. And so it just depends on your perspective. If you just think about also all of the commitments that have been made to net zero, the velocity of those commitments has accelerated dramatically, again, over the course of the last just several years, since 2020. And now we have over 70 countries that have committed to net zero by 2050. And all of these policy tailwinds that we're seeing in Europe through the Green New Deal, like I just said, in the United States and also China. But we can't just flip on a light switch. It's a process, it's a transition. And so I think we're at the beginning stages of the transition, and we probably aren't moving fast enough, and we maybe won't, but I do think that we're turning the ship.
Right.
So what does that mean? We're not getting to where we need to go fast enough, and the world is making a commitment to change.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I'll take that as a half glass full statement, because I generally think that awareness level is going up. I think probably there's just a process that will happen where literally change will accelerate as certain businesses, certain government initiatives start to scale a bit more. So hopefully that will all take shape. But certainly I think that there's a desire there to make changes. But let me ask perhaps a related question, but perhaps slightly a different path here, Heather. I mean, it's an interesting world. You went from the world of finance and investing, and you've shifted over now into this world of battling climate change through investing. I mean, tell me a little bit more about that kind of essence of your passion, really where this comes from. And I guess what I say, what gets you up in the morning, keep the fight going?
I mean, honestly, it's just, I do have a deep passion for our planet, and it's where we live. And when I told you about what I saw firsthand in Cambodia, you go to places like India, it's very much there as well. Or even if you go to some of the national parks in the United States, you realize that all of these wild places are being diminished.
Mhm.
And before I quit my job and launched ScopeFour, I thought deeply about how I could make the most impact. And I think what a lot of individuals experience is some anxiety around what can we personally do to make a difference.
Mhm.
And it feels like there's nothing oftentimes. And then you just sort of resort to, well, it's going to happen. I'm just going to keep living my life. And so I kind of turn that on its head. And part of why I launched ScopeFour is that, first of all, I think there are three ways to create systemic change. One is through policy, one is through education, which I think we need a lot more of around this topic. And the third is through investment to scale. And so that's why I launched ScopeFour. And then the other piece is just about extending agency to people, extending agency to investors, giving investors the ability to vote with their dollars, or to even have an opportunity to invest in this multi-decade secular trend and also do something good. There's something that's hard to do, is to say, hey, I'm gonna invest my dollars into something where I know it's positively shifting what's going on in the environment, and also I'm going to earn a return on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's lacking right now in the investment world, and that's what all the argument is about. And so that's really our sole focus.
Yeah. And I think that's really where that ESG, kind of how you measure all of that fun stuff, and I suppose keep track or keep score from a finance perspective, whilst also kind of hitting these broader goals. But I mean, Heather, it's an interesting time. Certainly I think, during the pandemic that we had these moments where cities like Mumbai had clear skies over them, and you were like, oh my God, I think I understand the impact we're having on the environment. But now we find ourselves in a bit of a complex economic cycle, and just be curious to see what you see on the horizon over the next 18 months.
I think that we've avoided recession. I think that inflation has come down, and a lot of the worries that we've been seeing have been abated, and a lot of in a variety of different sectors, including the stock market, but just in general in the economy. I was just reading about kind of what's going on from an economic standpoint, and it's kind of a tale of two cities. I could make an argument for either way. And that's why I think there's so much uncertainty just from an investment standpoint as to what's going to happen. And so a lot of investors are just taking a moment and being prudent with their capital, not necessarily moving to cash, but not doing anything, not rotating their assets. I think there's been a ton of money that's been pumped into private equity and private credit. And then obviously fixed income is a great area that was never a great area prior to now, just because interest rates have been so low, and so they've ticked up. But what I would say, over the long term, I think 18 months is a tough time period, but I think over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, that decarbonization is a huge trend where there could be amazing outsized returns from an opportunity perspective. AI, that's also an extremely important topic right now in the investment world. Different investment managers are trying to figure out how to incorporate it, and if they should be incorporating it into their process as part of, levels of efficiency. But I would say that this area is a little, investors are hesitant to incorporate anything that's uncertain from a technological standpoint. And so I would say that they're not going to be first movers there.
Yeah. Well, it's all good. I mean, I think that AI has some things it needs to work out on
Yes,
the sustainability front itself. There was a really interesting paper that came out several years now ago, maybe 3 years ago, from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and it really highlighted the climate impact of AI,
right.
which
People
is
don't
which
realize that.
yeah, which is not insignificant actually.
Mhm. I know.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that people that work in AI are certainly pushing for much more efficient ways to do it, but the current models of generative AI are not very efficient, actually. So
Right.
it's just raw kind of processing power. So we'll see how that evolves over time, but it's amazing, and certainly the impact that groups like Scope4 are having are really a step in the right direction. Heather, if someone wanted to learn more about what you and Scope4 Capital are doing, where's the best place to get in touch with you?
I think probably just through our website. And we also have a ton of thought pieces and thought leadership on our website going more into detail about what we mean when we say climate solutions. We didn't talk too much about this, but it is renewable energy, but it's also really boring things like insulation and LED lighting as you think about building infrastructure. And so it's sort of across the board. And so people can learn a little bit more about that. And the website is scope4capital.com. And you could also enter in your name, and then we could reach out to you if they're interested in learning more. And then we also have some thought leadership on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being on Uncaged today. We've been speaking with Heather Beatty. We've been talking to her about her company, Scope4 Capital. She's a CEO and founder of Scope4 Capital and is a leader in climate and impact investing. Been talking about the state of that climate and impact investing marketplace. Lots of really interesting opportunities, lots of action, lots of steps being taken to move things forward. And Heather is one of the key people driving it all. Heather, thank you so much for being on Uncaged, and we look forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me. It was good talking to you.
Cheers.